Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me to discuss COVID-19's impact on the importance of consumer spending data for the investment management industry is Randy Koch, CEO of Factus. And Randy, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thank you, Jill. Glad to be here.
And Randy, as a class of alt data, what has been the pandemic's impact on the importance of consumer spending data for the investment management industry? What story does it tell, or how does it help uncover trends?
Yeah, let me take a step back and first describe who Factus is. So Factus is a data company that transforms billions of spending transactions, think debit and credit cards, into meaningful insights for the investment, retail, and government communities. To answer your question specifically on the impact that consumer data is having specifically during COVID and quite frankly afterwards, basically importance comes down to three main things. The first is that the old financial models due to COVID are essentially dead. And if you look at the way investors and retailers used to look at their businesses, it was, how are we doing Q3 2020 versus Q3 2019? Those models no longer matter, and quite frankly, they're inaccurate. What they really want to know is, how are we doing month over month, or even week over week, or even day over day? And consumer spending data models that perfectly. That's the first point. The second point is the real-time nature of consumer spending data. We literally get data every single day and are able to show the trends the day after. And that's really important during COVID, just the real-time impact of consumer spending data. And the third thing is, look, it's the truth. And when I say it's the truth, if you compare it to other data sets and even old school data sets like satellite imagery or surveys, which used to try to get empirical data, or even foot traffic now. If you want to know how a company's doing in real time, and you really want to know the truth of how they're doing, there's no better data set than spending transactions that tell you exactly what the consumers are spending. That's the impact it's had during COVID.
Yeah, I mean, certainly gone are the days of the analysts, counting foot traffic in the malls over the holiday season. So with that said, let's talk about that spending data. What is it showing? What has the impact been as a result of COVID-19?
Yeah, some of the impacts are pretty well known. Like, for example, if you take a category level, we all know, for example, that, movie theaters and travel industry, they're down 78%. You can see that in our chart. You also know that in general, certain categories, say, for example, home improvement and even grocery, those are up 28%. Those are pretty well known. But if you start to unpack that a little bit, you'll start to find some data insights that aren't necessarily as readily visible. So a great example of that is restaurants. We're showing in our data is up 6%. And that might come as a surprise to a lot of your listeners and investors, because your eyes might not tell you that as you walk around your community. But if you unpack the data a little bit, what you find out is that certain subcategories of restaurants are absolutely lifting the entire category. An example there would be the pizza category. The pizza category, I think most of us know, is doing well. It's actually up 28%. But then if you actually realize the impact of the pizza category on the overall sector, it's huge. Domino's is up 40%. They've published that. And if you talk about 16,000 stores of Domino's that are up 40%, you can start to see how some of these subcategories and even specific corporates are doing well that would lift the whole category that otherwise might not be apparent when you think of the category.
So in addition to investors, how can banks and retailers use this data to their advantage?
It's a good question. So let's start with banks first. One of the key questions for banks during COVID coming out of it is, who do we lend to, both from a consumer perspective and from a business perspective? And if you look at the business side of this, if you're a bank on Main Street, or even a larger bank, and you want to figure out, do you lend money to Joe's Pizza Shop? Do you lend money to Sam's haircut, barbershop, right? I can't think of any better data than consumer spending data. How are they doing since the pandemic? It's real data, it's factual data, and it's right there in front of them. So that's what banks are using consumer spending data for. On the retail side, here's an interesting thing about retail. If you look at your normal retailer, you'll find out they know everything. They have great data about their own business. What they don't have, what are absolute blind spots to them, are the following. How am I doing versus my competition? How am I doing online and offline versus my competition? And what are some of the consumer behavior changes that I've seen? Spending data gives you rich insights into all three of those, and I'd happy to go into examples if you'd like.
So, Randy, how does Factus gather all of this data and how do you use it?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we partner with hundreds of banks and fintechs to safely aggregate and monetize their spending transactions. And the way we do that is we've created technology called synthetic data. And synthetic data transforms their billions of raw transactions into safe aggregated trends that provides the following. One, it's impossible to reverse engineer that data back to the original consumer and back to the banking institution itself. So that's how we collect the data. We've been doing this for 7+ years, and the whole banking and fintech industry trusts us because we are able to secure their data and aggregate it in a way that's 100% secure.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up because our data is just readily available out there. I mean, we are producers of data all day long. And of course, you know, the security question always comes into play with that. And I think consumers are increasingly concerned with who's using it, analyzing it, and what the finished product looks like.
Yeah, that's right. And quite frankly, they should be. And just to give you an example, and if you look at the chart we've provided, the way people should think of the world is there's three types of data. There's raw transactions, which has personal information and is very risky. And you don't want that out there with Factus or other entities. Then you have anonymized transactions, which you simply remove the personal information, but you still keep the rest of the data the same. And synthetic data goes a step further. And what synthetic data does is not only does it remove the personal information, but then it minutely changes each of the transactional fields so that they can never be traced back to the original person nor the original banking institution, but yet the overall aggregate of the synthetic data is still 100% accurate.
Interesting. Randy, appreciate the insight. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks.
Thank you.
And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.